Does it ever seem harder than it needs to be? You know those moments when it's like it seems like we're making no progress. Shouldn't it be easier? I mean, we belong to the Lord God of the universe. We've got him on our side. We've got these amazing promises. Why does it have to be so hard? And when it seems like we're making no progress, how do we respond? There's a great story in Ezekiel 29. It says the army of Nebuchadnezzar battled hard against Tyre. And it goes on and it says that every head was rubbed bald, every shoulder was raw and blistered. In other words, it was long, hard, dry effort. And in fact, it goes on and says, but there was no plunder to reward them for all of their hard work. So it seems like all of this effort for nothing? Now we contrast that with what I consider to be the ideal. Mark 16:20, which says that the Lord worked with them in power, his miracles confirming their words. In other words, for you and I, what does that mean? They were functioning in their calling purpose, the mission God had for them, and he was working with them alongside them and confirming all of their efforts by his power. So that's the ideal. So when we're in those seasons, we're in those times when it just doesn't seem like we see the Lord working with us, we're not seeing his power confirming, are we off track? Have we missed it somewhere? How do we respond? Well, first, we have to recognize God does allow those seasons from time to time, and he has a purpose when he does. We look at the first two kings of Israel. Saul, the first king, he seemed to have everything it took, and he had early, easy success, but ultimately would be generally considered a failure. Now, David, on the other hand, had a very different experience. He endured years of persecution, struggled for years before he received what God had for him. But the difference was for David, he became known as a man after God's own heart and is probably the greatest, most well-known king in the entire world. Now, does that mean that it just has to be tough? Well, not necessarily, but we do recognize God allows those seasons and he has purposes. We see that with God's people in Egypt. God allowed them to suffer severe discomfort. Why? He had this amazing thing, this inheritance called the Promised Land that he wanted to move them to. So there are times where God will allow things to get tough. Why? He's developing us. He's preparing us for something new. He's got something else for us. So how do we respond? Well, first, all things good and painful, uncomfortable, whatever, everything in our lives is ultimately for his glory. See, first off, we have to reposition that as much as it is our story, it's really about him. So we recognize everything is for his glory. And when we understand that, then our proper response in all things, the good and the painful, is to focus on and draw near to him. So as we focus and draw near to him, then we begin to slowly get more revelation. Are we, as can be our tendency, are we just working in our own plan, our own strategy, and basically asking God to bless what we're doing? Or is this really God's plan, his will, in which case we will get the strength, the endurance that we need to persevere through. In the process, God develops us, we receive all that he has for us, and as we'll see in a moment, there is a reward at the end. Or have we missed it somewhere? Have we become distracted? Have we gotten slightly off track? Are we asking God just to bless our plans rather than being truly in his will, which is where we truly want to be? And we have to have the humility, because we've all done it and we will all do it, to recognize, okay, whoa, I got a little off track there, a couple of steps back, get back. Why? Because that's where we want to be. That's where the fulfillment is. That's where the fun is. That's where the excitement is. And when we're in those dry, tough seasons, recognizing God is still at work. So as we focus on him, we draw near to him, we allow him to begin to show us, did we miss it somewhere? And first off, because I'm the worst at this. Don't have that knee-jerk reaction, we must be off track. Just let God begin to show us. Again, look at how David endured and the reward that was there for him at the end. So there are those seasons, and while the ideal, and we want to experience that more and more of the Lord working with us, there are those seasons when it is hard, dry labor. But God is faithful. In fact, going back to the army of Nebuchadnezzar, so they had this hard, dry labor. It took ages. But God does say this. He goes on and says, I have given them the land of Egypt as a reward. That's their plunder. Why? Because he says, they worked for me. Now, think about it. This is the army of Nebuchadnezzar. They're not God's people, but their mission was fulfilling God's purpose. And in that, our God is so faithful, he rewarded them for that. If he'll do that for Nebuchadnezzar's army, how much more will he do? What greater reward will he give to you and I as his people?